Welcome, folks. Let me start off like this. Do the New York Mets need Mr. Pete Alonso? I want you to think about that as this video goes along. Do the New York Mets need Pete Alonso? And more specifically, do they need Pete Alonso to make the playoffs? Right? Because obviously, you don't need any player, but why would you want Pete Alonso? To make your team better, to make your team better, to make the playoffs and eventually win the World Series. But you know what? There's only one team that can win the World Series. So, clear cut question. Do the Mets need Pete Alonso to make the playoffs? All right, folks. A lot of rumors swirling out there, especially about our New York Mets and Mr. Pete Alonso. We're going to get into a lot of topics, or quite a few very important topics. Let's just say that. Um, there was a contract offer that was rumored to be about. I saw it on Carlos Baerga. He posted it that supposedly an offer was thrown out by the New York Mets. Very, interesting offer. 3-year deal worth $90 million, folks. And it was an opt out after each year. And that would make Pete, that would make Pete the highest paid first baseman at an average annual clip of $30 million a year. So that is a very interesting contract. I mean, if you want to know who is the highest paid player this year, first baseman wise, it would be Vladimir Guerrero Jr. He arbitration wise, he won, and they're paying him $28.8 million. Is Pete better than Vladimir? No. The second highest paid guy, Freddie Freeman, he's making 27 million. Is Pete better than Freddie? No. Third highest paid first baseman, Bryce Harper, he will be making $25.4 million. Is Pete better than Bryce? No. Um, Matt Olson, fourth highest, he will be making 21 million. Now, is Pete better than Matt? Well, I guess it gets into more of an interesting conversation there. But you know what? Matt Olson is making 21 million. So if Pete makes $30 million at age 30, he'd be the highest paid first baseman, by a good amount, next year, let's say he has that great Pete Alonso type of year. He wants to be paid like a superstar, so he should produce like one. And if he produces like a superstar, he will have that opportunity next year to test the market again. But folks, I think there's more here than meets the eye. And later in this video, we're going to talk about the Scott Boras component. But I want to focus initially on Pete Alonso. Why would Pete reject a 3-year $90 million? And we're going to just negate the fact, okay, yes, he wants a long-term contract. Yes, he wants a $200 million contract, 6-7 years. Okay, everybody wants that. Everybody wants that. But the market is clearly yelling. Why would Pete be so resistant to listening to what the market is saying? Guys have been in this situation before. He saw Bellinger last year. He saw Chapman. He saw Blake Snell. You know what? You take the opt out after 1 year, and you go ahead and test the market. And you go ahead this year and you ball out. You have Juan Soto on the team. You have a great lineup supporting you. This should be the year where you say, hey, there's no doubt. There is no doubt. Honestly, folks, it kind of two things are clicking in my head, and I mean they're not so good. They're not so good. One is that is Pete being greedy, right? And if he was being greedy, I'd be like, all right, maybe he feels he deserves more. That wouldn't be so alarming. Guys want to be paid, guys want to take care of their family, guys think they accomplished what they accomplished should entitle them to a long-term contract. That's number one. But the second scenario is kind of scary, and it kind of goes toward the question: do we need Mr. Pete Alonso? Now, Pete knows he's aging. Pete has had some, I'll say hit by pitches in the past couple of years, and I always pinpoint to the time when he was hit in the wrist by Charlie Morton, by the Atlanta Braves last year, June 2023. Pete Alonso came back early. I don't know if that wrist ever properly healed. That's my opinion. How many of us have had those injuries and haven't given the injury time to heal? Often, you have lingering effects. Now, the wrist is extremely important in generating power. Since that wrist injury, Pete, in my opinion, has struggled really mightily, mightily. So that is just me kind of speculating. I've had many injuries. I don't even want to go through the list. But I hope that second scenario where Pete is doubting kind of his abilities is not the case, folks. I really hope it's not the case because I think what the Mets are offering is quite fair considering what the market is saying. Every team and their mother filled the position. Every team said, hey, Scott Boras said $200 million, and they pivoted elsewhere because the market was set way too high, way too high. So that's where you can kind of get into Boris making that mistake and leading Pete down astray. But, Pete should say, you know what, put your big boy pants on and say, you know what, I'm going to go and I'm going to produce. Okay, so that scenario. Those are the two scenarios I think Pete is speculating in his head. And you know what? He's got to be nervous, folks. He's got to be nervous. If the Mets opt out, and you heard that Pete, and this is I would say a week ago, you heard, not a week ago, I'm sorry, like 3 or 4 days ago, I jotted this note down, and the news story was that Pete Alonso and Scott Boras are going to stay out and wait as long as it takes. They'll sign in February. They'll sign in March. As long it's going to take to get that contract. I mean, that's silly. So the Mets are going to fill the position. Another team might fill the position because they're not willing to pay that ridiculous price. And you think Pete's value is going to go up? That's silly. That's silly. That's not how supply and demand works. Less money out there. Yeah, I mean, it's just silly. Nobody's looking for Pete. Now we're still going to get into the Boris component, but let me tell you one thing. Why is MLB so hesitant to invest in a 30-year-old Pete, an unathletic guy, supposedly? I mean, Pete's not the most athletic guy, but a guy who is just one dimensional. He is a guy who he doesn't have that gold glove. He is not an athletic guy. Well, what I tried to do is I researched the last 30 years. How many guys, first basemen, age 30 and older that have signed long-term contracts, and I classify long-term contracts as at least 5 years, has been successful, right? Has been successful. So over the last 30 years, I looked at it. There hasn't been many guys that have signed at age 30 that long-term contract. Really. And so, really, it is so rare. You have Freddie Freeman. He signed a 6-year, $162 million contract. Paul Goldsmith, 5-year, 130. Albert Pujols, 10-year, 240. Ryan Howard, 5-year, 125. He was 30 years old. Miguel Cabrera at age 31 signed in 8 years, 248. That is it, folks. That is it. In 30 years, you have 5 examples of guys who were age 30 or more and sign at least a 5-year deal. Now, there are a handful of other players. You have Joey Votto and you have Mark Teixeira. But those guys, and they sign, I think, at age 28, 29, and they sign long-term contracts as well. But the list is very, very small, very, very small. Even a guy like Teixeira, you'll be like, oh, Teixeira, he won a championship. After age 32, Teixeira was done, right? So, you going to the list, Miguel Cabrera, he signed at age 31. After age 31, in that contract, Miguel Cabrera only had one season where he hit over 30 home runs. Ryan Howard signed at age 31. Ryan Howard, after age 31, never hit more than 30 home runs. Albert Pujols, same thing, signed that 10-year contract age 32. It's horrible, horrible, horrible. So, you got those 3 guys, and then the other 2 guys are more recent: Goldsmith and Freddie Freeman. Goldsmith is a guy who is an MVP and won 4 Gold Gloves. So he doesn't compare like Pete. He does not compare. Goldsmith has pop. He's a 290 career hitter, and he's a defensive whiz. Doesn't profile like Pete. Very successful contract. That is the exception, and Freddie Freeman the exception. So in the last 30 years, there's only been two guys over the age 30 that have been successful, and those guys are Gold Glove. They're probably going to be both future Hall of Famers. They're both Gold Glove Award winners. They're both MVPs, Freddie Freeman and Goldschmidt. That's not how Pete is profiling. Pete really, in my opinion, profiles a lot more like a Ryan Howard. He does. He profiles a lot more like a Ryan Howard and did not do well in the home run department and basically fizzled out. Wasn't a good signing. Cabrera, not a good signing. Pujols, not a good signing. Teixeira, you look at his contract after the age 32, he fizzled out as well. So there has been many, many examples of guys not working out. Um, not working out at all. But if you look at the total summation of all these guys who have received contracts, first basemen over 30, it's very, very barren, few and far between. So MLB has basically not given these 30-year-olds who are first basemen many long-term contracts. They're not athletic. Pete Alonso fits that mold perfectly, and you have already seen a regression with Pete Alonso. Now, the reason why I looked at this list is because I said, you know what? If Scott Boras really, really wants Pete to get his money, all Scott Boras has to do is lay down a list of all the successful guys in Pete Alonso's same predicament, all the guys who have been successful, lay it out for all the teams to see, all the examples. But folks, there are none here. None here. The only two first basemen who have been successful are Goldsmith and Freeman. And like I mentioned, Pete doesn't profile like those guys. He's not a defensive whiz, and he's not a high average hitter, and he's not athletic. He's not like these guys. So that's why Pete is having trouble. Plus, Pete has shown regression in the last 2 years. He has shown regression. Those two guys, when they signed their contracts, Goldsmith and Freeman, were not showing regression. So what is going on? I mean, Scott Boras, in my opinion, um, he's not doing his clients any any favors really. I mean, those guys like Juan Soto, those top market guys, you're going to get the money. The money's going to be there for Guerrero. The money is going to be there for guys like Juan Soto. But Boris has to do a much better job of identifying guys like Pete Alonso who could be considered by teams as not deserving of these mega contracts. I mean, asking for $200 million in 7, 8 years is ridiculous. Carlos Baerga. Now let's get into what is going on. We've already identified um, the why teams are very hesitant to give a 30-year-old first baseman. History has spoken, and history often repeats itself. And Pete, it's not like he's saying, "Hey teams, I just had a breakout year or I had a phenomenal year like Aaron Judge did." No, he is basically backing up what history has said, that guys first basemen will regress, and he's shown that regression. Now, the situation that lies, and Carlos Baerga already brought it up. He said that the Mets have um, made that offer 3 years, 90 million. Boris and Alonso's goal is $200 million. Now the Mets are still expected, supposedly, to work out some type of deal, but there are rumors right now that the gap is very big, is a very big gap. So, it basically Mets have sizable gap in contract talks amid free agency. According to John Heyman of the New York Post, there is a sizable gap in the talks between the Mets and Alonso at the moment. Heyman noticed that it doesn't mean he's gone, but no quick deal appears at hand. Mets president of baseball operations Stearns previously said that the team would love to bring Alonso back. So John Heyman is saying, he's basically saying right now that there's a huge gap, but it doesn't mean he's gone. And a lot of people kind of say that John Heyman is the mouthpiece of Scott Boras. So is John Heyman saying, "Hey, Mets, you better kind of think twice because there's a big gap." Doesn't mean that he's going elsewhere, but who is this message? Who is this message from, and who is it for? At the end of the day, the Mets seem like the only team for Pete. It seemed like it's too good to be true. Like the Mets aren't silly. This is not the Wilpon Mets. So that's why I believe Scott Boras is going to have his work cut out for him. The Mets aren't going to all of a sudden wake up one day and saying they need to give Pete Alonso $200 million. It's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Now Heyman goes on to write and saying he's exceeded 30 home runs in each of the past 4 years and has remained relatively healthy. Pete Alonso has raked since joining the Mets. He's second in home runs since 2019, and he's first in RBIs. Concerns lie with his age. A long-term deal after he just turned 30 may be questionable. May be questionable. So let's go back to our original question. Do the Mets need Pete Alonso? Well, at this point, the Mets have pivot options. They do. They can sign an Alex Bregman, and I think that is the most popular, I would say, pivot at this point. The most popular pivot, because if you do that, you put Mark Vientos to first base, and then, you don't really, in my opinion, you know, Alex Bregman is a different type of hitter. So it's, you'd be having a very strong presence in the lineup. In fact, John Heyman says about that, the Bregman situation, that Bregman to the Mets is still a great fit. And that he goes, you know what? I'm not going to rule out Bregman to the Mets at this point. I think that they do like him very much. Vientos would go to first, as I mentioned. I mean, the guy's a gamer. Heyman said before mentioning the New York Yankees. So that I would say is, the right now option. But long term, you got options like Ryan Clifford down in the majors, not in the majors, down in the minors. He's one of our highly touted prospects. But there are many options at first base. How many guys changed teams this offseason at first base? Paul Goldsmith, I don't know if he'll have a good season, but there'll always be those short term options until a guy like Ryan Clifford, balls out. Maybe you shift Ronnie Mauricio, to third base. Then you shift Vientos to first base. There are many options that the Mets could swing right now, and Juan Soto essentially replaces Pete Alonso on the offensive end. So, compared to last year, you're having Soto replace Alonso, and last year's offensive stats for the New York Mets, we were in the top 8, 9 in every single offensive category. So I would say offense wasn't our biggest concern. You always want to get better because your ultimate goal is to be the best, not to be top 8, not top 9, top 10. You ultimately want to be the best so you can be a world champion, especially when your pitching isn't the best. You need something to hang your hat on. So at the end of the day, it all comes down to leverage. It all comes down to leverage. And I believe the New York Mets are right now sitting in the driver's seat. They are sitting pretty. They can dictate the terms at their disposal, at what they want to do. And they want a short-term contract. Because of what I told you, there are not examples of these contracts working out. So why overpay? Scott Boras, your job was to create a bidding war. Your job was to create interest. You failed miserably. I mean, maybe you should have done this before Juan Soto signed. Maybe the market was better back then or could have established a market. Now, when teams spent most of their disposable income or the income they didn't spend, they have it allocated toward potentially next year. It's just not going to work. Scott Boras royally screwed Pete. Royally screwed Pete. Now, I'm going to say it like this. I'm going to answer the question myself. I personally don't think the Mets need Pete to make the playoffs. I don't think that Pete, he's about a 3 wins above replacement player. I think they can make that up easily. I know we're thinking about the great moments with Pete, but I don't think we're going to be getting the 2022 version of Pete, right? I like to have him as a luxury because we can always shift him over to first from DH. But I don't think that we need him. He is a luxury at this point, a luxury. So I mean that means we're not gonna pay a luxury 5 or 6 years. It's just not gonna happen. 3 years max. I mean, if you're gonna need a fourth year to get it done, that's something to think about. That is something to think about. That means you would have Pete for his age 30, 31, 32, 33 season. So, I mean, honestly, thinking about that, I'd probably do that too. Because most of the contracts of guys that I research, they basically dropped off a cliff after I would say after 31. After 31. So, I mean, Stearns pushing this 3 year contract might be, him doing his due diligence based on that fact. All right, folks, let me know what you think. Is Pete Alonso, is it worth the New York Mets? Do the Mets need him? Do the Mets need him? What are your opinions about the contract negotiations? I think it's eventually going to happen because, I think Pete will come to his senses, look in the mirror and say the New York Mets are the only team there. They're the only team there. Um, and there's actually another question that folks have been asking me, but I think it's going to be a little too long to talk about. But I think it's a very important topic. The topic is, and I'm going to leave this for my next video. Have the New York Mets treated Pete Alonso correctly? Have they treated him right? I have a lot of people telling me that the Mets have not treated Pete right, not treated Pete right. So I think that's a very interesting conversation. Have the New York Mets thus far treated Pete Alonso right? So I'm just writing some notes down so we don't forget. Again, I want to thank everybody for all their support. Our last video did great. We are, over here, we're still enjoying Christmas. I hope you're enjoying your holidays as well. Smash that like button, help out the channel. I thank you to all our new members. We just opened up our memberships. That helps support the channel as well. So thank you so much. You're doing a lot, and I really do appreciate it. Again, our channel is going to be 2 years old. This I think December 29th. December 29th. So that's in 2 days. 2 days. Anniversary time. So thank you again. Have a great day, and let's go Mets.